All right, I am here today with Colton Moffitt. Colton is a former private investigator turned risk management expert and M&A advisor. For risk management, he often acts as a client liaison, coordinating with the likes of law enforcement, intelligence collectors, security consultants, PR professionals, and more. Across jurisdictions, he works to counter things like insider threats, corporate espionage, kidnapping, blackmail, and organized fraud. As an M&A advisor, he specializes in joint ventures, strategic partnerships, and business development. Since 2016, he's done over 100 deals on that front. Colton, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before we hopped on, it's reading your background. I can't tell if you're, a detective, a secret agent, a Wall Street deal maker. It's an interesting and diverse background. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, your background, where you came from and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. I actually not not any of the things that you mentioned, but I can see why it would seem that way. So I'm originally from Vermont, which, if you're listening to this and you are not that familiar with the States, Vermont is a very rural kind of touristy hills and cows area north of New York City. A good distance north even of Boston. It's way up there. Um,
First thing that comes to
so
my mind is maple syrup when you say Vermont.
Awesome. All right. So we're a brand. And, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time running around outside and all that, and moved a good bit around the country and saw different kinds of environments, different ways of living and making money, and generally kind of existing within the U.S. And by the time I was 18, I was quite interested in seeing more of the world, and I did that. I did that for a long time, continued to, and that has led to, fortunately for me, a career that involves a lot of those risk management elements you talked about and M&A. And I started getting involved with the M&A side of things in 2016 because I wanted to continue traveling. I wanted to continue doing that, which, getting as far away as possible from Vermont, I guess. It's actually it's a lovely place, don't get me wrong. But to keep going with it in 2016 and prior to it, remote work was still a bit unusual. A lot of my friends still needed to go to an office. They still needed to be in a certain place 90 something percent of the year. And, our fellow Americans understand that you don't get much vacation. This is not France. You might get 2 weeks if you're, you know, connected. So it was just a different lifestyle. And that was a lot of why I got into consulting, security consulting, and then into M&A through the process of due diligence, negotiation support, doing like basically advising through the process of the deal, but not having to do a whole lot of my own sourcing at first, which was pretty cool. Saved me a lot of effort and mistakes having a team around me and dealing with businesses which were global, online operations, remotely operated businesses. Didn't have anything to do with security or investigations. That was kind of a previous thing. Um, but it all came back together a few years ago when I took the skill set and the business model of M&A advisory and actually doing deals for your own portfolio. And I brought that back into my kind of home industry, which allowed me to travel around like that to begin with.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
Um, Rewinding back to 18, what do you think it was that got you curious about traveling the world and inspired you?
I had already seen so much of the United States, and you know, it's a Rolling Stone gathers no moss or whatever. You want to get outside and see something different after a while. Um, I'd say that was part of it, and part of it was just when I was a kid. You remember I mentioned I ran around outside a lot, and in Vermont, you don't have cities really, but you do have friends who have lots of land. So 100 acres or something. Very go out and get lost on purpose. And you look back at that. That was the '90s. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young either. And being able to just be outside all day could have fallen off a cliff. I could have been dead. We didn't have cell phones. So nobody was giving their, 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid a cell phone back then. So it was just that adventure. I always enjoyed it. And, you know, every sort of job I thought I wanted when I was a kid involved going somewhere kind of crazy. So yeah, that was it. That was the motivation. I got to get out of my little college town and move on.
Cool.
You've traveled quite a bit too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just wrapping up 2 years digital nomading. Um, yeah, I kind of it's when you're kind of describing, wanting to go out and explore, I resonate with that a little bit. Like, and I was in college like 2011 to 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, like I knew about 4 hour work week and that kind of thing, and always kind of
Yeah.
stuck with me. So I'm sure
Okay.
that was, the late 2000s, I guess, that sort of movement started. But like you said, it wasn't huge back then. It was still kind of gathering momentum.
Yeah, I read that book, and it's it is funny because you wouldn't necessarily think that I ended up doing what I'm doing specifically because of things like that, but it definitely got in my head, and I already wanted to travel. So I remember I was going to book a flight either to Brazil or to Croatia. I saw them on the internet. I was like, all right, we got to go do this, and ultimately ended up being Croatia. But sounds like you made it to Brazil, obviously. That's great.
Did you ever end up going to Brazil?
Not yet, no. Have never been anywhere south of the U.S., like in this hemisphere, except for Mexico, which
Okay,
yeah, was really cool too.
cool. Croatia's on my list. Never been there. So,
Well, I went in the winter. I went to Zagreb in the winter, so I haven't really had the Croatia experience that people put on their Instagram. But it was great anyway. I love the people.
cool. Um, so what about the kind of the early entry into private investigation and stuff like that? And I know you mentioned, it was sort of the freedom, the location freedom aspect that,
Mhm.
whether it's the investigation or the risk management. And can you talk about that and like how those two are related? I'm not connecting the dots there yet.
Yeah, sure. So the type of investigations I did were mostly conducted online. So I was able to not have to go anywhere in particular. And at the time, I was still living in the area I was licensed in. So you have licensing on a state by state basis, um, like most licensed professions, right? Or municipal in some cases, but in our case, it was state. And so I didn't really need to be here for it. And I decided to go around the US a little bit more while I was doing that. So if you ever are curious, you can go look up open source intelligence and that and variations of it and security consulting more broadly. Um, None of that required me to be anywhere. There was some stuff I did that was more traditionally what people think of when they think of PIs, like surveillance and such. Um, I did that. That requires you to be somewhere, but I only did that a few times. It's not for me. It's it's a very patient game, and I'm not that patient in that context, right? 12 hours sitting in one spot, staring at one in one direction is not glamorous. So not that sitting on your laptop is glamorous either, but at least there was no pretense to it. And I guess I'm just kind of one of those people that likes to sit at home more than I like to go out and do things, which is awful. Kind of contradictory to everything I've told you, but even when I'm moving to these different countries, I spend a lot of time at in my Airbnb on a laptop, which is also probably not what people think when they hear. But you probably know, 2 years, you got to work.
Yeah, exactly. That resonates with me because yeah, did a lot of co-working spaces, a lot of chilling in the Airbnb. You're not,
Yeah.
contrary to popular belief, you're not, riding an elephant with your laptop.
No, no, and people get mad at you if you ride them now too. So you
Yeah.
gotta be careful. I have not, as a matter of fact, and I didn't get that close to any elephants. I was in Thailand, and they're definitely beautiful, but I saw them at the zoo, so it's a little bit
Okay.
at a distance. The I don't know. I mean, the idea of having those sort of travels is great. You go and do the quite tourist type of thing that you'd expect, and it's a lot of fun. I remember being 26 or something, and I was in the Philippines, kind of standing out in the water, and I looked back at the island, and it had that look to it that, you're like, oh, okay, so this is what I wanted to do. This
Yeah.
is what people are working all year to save up their time and their money to go on a vacation to the Philippines. And at that time, 2016, I was there. I had a little money, but I was still pretty broke. And just like, well, here I am. I mean, I did it. That's what I said. I read the 4 hour work week. I said I wanted to be able to work from a beach. Wi-Fi is awful, but it was still kind of amazingly achievable, and that was a cool perspective shift. I'm guessing you had similar ones where, and so not that that lifestyle is the end all be all for everybody, but that if you thought, oh man, I'm just going to work another year, and then next summer I'm going to go and we're going to have an awesome trip to Thailand or Philippines or Mexico and just chill on the beach, and then you do it. If you do it as a full-time sort of ordeal, whatever. That was easy. I didn't need to work all year for that. So I think people probably found that after the whole COVID things, a shifting in values and goals a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like that was kind of a silver lining of the whole thing, is an acceleration to that freedom for more people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A little harder for us to travel around, but made it work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's funny what you mentioned about the beach too. It's like, the idea, even though that's the picture everyone sees in their mind, like you have the laptop next to the pool or the beach. Like I hate bringing my laptop out to the beach or pool. It's the sand and sun, the glare on the screen.
Can't see anything except your smudges and your greasy popcorn Airbnb pig out. It's it's not exactly what it looks like. But it's
Yeah.
all as an alternative. I mean, I have worked in, your sort of 2 or 3 story office building with the drop ceiling and the carpet, just office space style
Yeah.
environment and call center. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to complain too much about the sand or the the Wi-Fi. Oh man, how I suffer.
Yeah. Definitely not a woe is me type of
No,
situation.
no.
Um, so you went from private investigator, and you're doing a lot of this online. Did you go directly from that into kind of the world of M&A, and how did that come about?
Yeah. So in 2016, I had a conversation with another PI, and we were talking about kind of what I was trying to achieve. I was in my mid 20s, and he was kind of twice my age, I guess. He's sort of, what are you trying to achieve here? And I told him what my overall, I guess, financial ambitions were, not so much like the total picture of my life or anything, but is that you'll never do that as a private investigator, and I know that. It's you got to figure out how to make myself useful often enough for long enough to figure out a different model. Right? There's only so much you can improve your expertise and keep up with the latest and greatest and be the best at a given field. And I never was the best to begin with. So, it's a constant struggle to raise your rates in an environment where people are pushing hourly rates down, um, relative to purchasing power, right? So you're kind of in this struggle, the same as if you worked, as an accountant or a lawyer, or you're working in a fast food restaurant. You've got the kind of wage competition on an hourly basis, competing against yourself and allocating time. So I need to figure out a different way to make money is the simplest way to say it. But I guess I mean a different way to arrange my life so that it wasn't, my greatest success being losing all of my time. And it's 4 hour work week probably wormed its way into my brain and ruined the productive young man that used to exist. But it was a matter of, rearranging those resources. And so I needed to go learn how to do deals as a concept. It was so foreign to me at the time because I was trying to be as qualified as possible that I could maximize my hourly earnings. And my real grasp of business was just get more clients or get more work through the people that you work with, right? Not a whole lot more than that, which is really just job applications at scale, right? And not much scale. So I was trying to shift that, and I saw a friend of mine who we didn't really have much in common, and we would joke about that. We had very little in common. Didn't read the same books, didn't watch the same stuff, didn't really hang out with the same kind of people. But he was the boyfriend of one of my friend's sisters, and we were always in the same place. He was really sharp with business, though. It was like the only thing he talked about, the only thing he knew about. If you asked him, I'm sure he was like maybe a Lord of the Rings nerd or something behind the scenes, but nonetheless, if you asked him, that was the only thing he cared about. And he just had a way of taking something and knowing what he could get it for and how to flip it and how to arrange all the different parts in a deal so that he got compensated. I just watched him move through all these different deals over the course of the year or two I had known him at the time. He didn't have a job. You know, he didn't really have a service business where it was like he was self-employed or had an agency type model where it was really easy to grasp. The guy just arranged things really well. And yeah, he was buying and selling stuff, which is fairly straightforward, you'd think. But it was just the way he was able to do it so effectively. I got fascinated by that. Why? Why do you know how to do that? How do you know how to structure that? How to make sure that everything lines up properly in terms of timing and terms, and whether it was cars or just random stuff, classic cars, real estate, things to do with like TV shows on network television and how he was getting everything paid for. I was just fascinated. And he'd say, "Well, hey man, you're way smarter than me. I'm sure you'll figure out something soon too." And I remember thinking, well, that's a really polite way to say what he's saying. And you can be kind of book smart or well read anyway, but not really know how to situate yourself to earn more. And that was something that just like, man, I got to learn how to do that. How's he doing that? So that's when I went down the pathway of getting a job with a company that was involved with essentially the sale of small business assets for online businesses and such. So e-commerce, digital publishing sort of businesses, SaaS, membership sites, subscription boxes, all that sort of business that happens online, as well as your agency and your more typical intellectual property type of models.
That's great. How long did it take you to kind of get your sea legs in that sort of skill set of putting things together, putting deals together, and what did you learn along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning. So well, shoot, it's almost 2024, so 8 years. And I feel worse than I did at the beginning. Um, I think it's just
How so?
uh, because now I'm doing more of them and I'm getting a little better at it, and so I'm able to meet people and kind of understand what they're talking about who are doing more complex or higher value transactions, or they're, when I say more complex too, I mean the moving parts that are really just impressive. Thinking through all of the tax implications and the different jurisdictions and the structure to make sure everything hits just the right time. And there's a guy in a group we're both in, and he did a presentation at this conference we were both speaking at, and he bought a car wash. It's not his main business. He is in the business of rolling up these childcare centers, like daycare, where you drop your kids off. It's a separate building sort of business in the U.S. And they're around the world too, but they're pretty expensive in the States. I know people don't realize it's like you may as well hire someone full time. It's absurdly expensive. It can be. I mean, like $1,000 a month per kid or something. It's more. So, long story short, that's his main thing. They buy a bunch of those, and in order to offset a tax obligation he was going to have from the successful sale of different thing, he was able to take that and roll it into the acquisition of a car wash, which is the kind that you drive through, not the kind you self-serve. And these have some specific tax advantage which allowed him to actually end up profiting from the whole arrangement. And that happened so quickly because of text coming out, right? And that was really clever. So, all right, interesting. And I learned about that. And the guy was just fascinating and very good at what he does. And I mentioned this, it's been 6 months now since that. And I talked to a guy just the other night who is involved in this sort of stuff. It's, oh, yeah, that's all we do. Basically, they've got a fund where all they do is buy car washes for this purpose. And it works with some other things they've got in their portfolio. Okay. This stuff never would have crossed my mind when I started. It was more like, how do I value a blog with affiliate monetization? It was very, very basic, very rudimentary, which I take for granted because there are people who do, for instance, like brick and mortar business brokering, where if you ask them to value an e-commerce site, they might struggle unless they had the numbers given to them. And even then, the due diligence would be tough. It's its own animal.
It seems like that due diligence aspect would be a strong suit for you coming from an investigative standpoint. Have you found that that's kind of helped you?
Yeah. Normally I would say that, and that's kind of how I present it, I guess. But now that you've asked and I'm thinking through it, it's a little bit the other way around. Counterintuitively, the digital marketing experience I had earlier on while I was learning more of the security stuff I was learning early in my career. I just happened to also work in some e-commerce operation I sold a lot of outdoor gear and all kinds of stuff like that, right? Um, that helped me be more effective as an investigator and ultimately helped me get into being a PI later because I was able to look at things that were happening online and understand at a deeper level kind of what that represented, where to find more information. Um, and so, yeah, the digital marketing experience fed into my existing security sort of mindset and allowed me to get into investigations, which then ultimately looped back into diligence work. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit. So, you mentioned that things kind of all came together, where now you're kind of mixing the two worlds that you've been, has been probably the two biggest parts of your professional life, right? So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what you're doing now and who you serve.
Yeah. So distributedrisk.com. It's the same stuff, but it's only for security and risk management companies. So that has made it really simple for me, man. It's simplified a lot of my life and made it less stressful because I don't have so many different things I'm going after. But more importantly, it's just the industry I always felt was most worth my time. Um, I felt like I was pretty good at it as somebody who was doing the work on a contract basis. But more importantly, just based on kind of what I've seen of life in the world, I thought this was more important to me than another site that reviewed air fryers. you know and no offense, I mean, I think there's tons of great money to be made in the air fryer review racket and helping people sell those businesses, but I was just always really drawn to the security investigations industry. I enjoyed it. I really appreciated the people I got to work with. um, Fascinated by them. And so, yeah, best of both worlds. There's also a lot of growth in the industry because what we do it covers your physical security and crisis management as well as cybersecurity. So just across that whole spectrum, the industry sectors are vastly far and away, growing at a rapid rate and not really threatened by everything that's going on. Just the worse things get, the better the industry performs.
Yeah. Okay. So by that, you mean like there's a lot of change in the world technologically, economically, but this seems to be steady because it's about dealing with all that change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything kind of the bad news you see every day is viral on your social media feeds. Generally, bad news is good news if you're in the business of dealing with that kind of stuff for people, which is a nice offset to just seeing bad news. At least when I see it, it's like, okay, well, It's something I can do about it, right? I'm being a little bit facetious, trying to make it sound like, it's a purely financial motive. That's, so it's enough of a part of it to be honest about. Is, we're not running a nonprofit organization, but at the same time, the feeling of helplessness is something I've talked to my partners about. How that feeling of helplessness is awful. Nobody likes it, and we're primarily in the business of removing that, justifiably removing that feeling of helplessness. And by doing so, feeling less helpless, which is pretty cool. I think we want to be able to be useful to people. We want to be able to be helpful. Some do that by becoming firefighters or paramedics or joining the military or whatever the case may be. In the private sector, we have that opportunity to use the same sort of technology and talent to give people that peace of mind and the ability to make better decisions, to sleep soundly and safely. Um, and I think if I'm going to be doing deals and I'm going to be doing something for a largely profit centric motive, I wanted to do it in a place that also ticked the other boxes for me.
Yeah, I love that. It seems to be a space that you're really passionate about, and that there's something deeper there. Why do you think it is that you find so much fulfillment in this line of work?
Yeah, I mean that goes to life experiences when you're young and kind of have a beer about it someday in one of those sandy places where you can't see the screen. But it's not, it's not so dark or so awful, and it's not some kind of super villain creation or superhero calling, Bruce Wayne moment. It's really just you see things a certain way through the lens that you get handed to you. Kind of when you're a kid, you don't have a real conscious process of deciding how you're going to work through the world. You just take it at face value, and all of that left me with the kind of impression that you want to be as able as possible to do what you can to help yourself and the people around you. And that's a big motivator, I think.
Is it is is it from, like you mentioned, childhood? Like, were there times where you felt helpless as a kid and you wanted to have that more control, or wanted people to?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you want to be able to give it to people. And that's the one thing is being able to help yourself. And the other thing is being able to give that to somebody else. And having it in short supply as a kid, you don't have a lot you can do other than just sort of, you know, observe and say stuff. You can get away with saying all kinds of stuff when you're a kid. And I'm looking forward to when that comes full circle. I'm like 90 years old and just saying whatever I want all the time.
Cool. Um, can we make it a little concrete on like some of the things you help people with? I know what you kind of touched on in the very beginning when I gave your intro, but like maybe some stories that come to mind, or the things that you help people do.
Yeah. So if they want to sell their business and they want to do that right now, you can certainly take that from an M&A advisory type of perspective. Same goes if they're looking to grow by acquisition. We'll go and structure those, source the deals, diligence, negotiation, everything there, and ultimately do that on their behalf so they can keep doing whatever their core operation is. Um, we have other situations which are ongoing, and somebody wants to exit their business but it's not really ready where it's at, and we'll go and we'll partner with them. We'll take over a lot of the external growth side of things, the business development, partnerships, market entry, whatever needs to happen. Or we'll bring in outside people to take a look at things like intellectual property or the way the contracts are structured, the way their cash flow is kind of being handled, whatever it is to optimize the value so that when they do exit in 18 or 24 months or however long it takes, they're going to get the value that they need out of it. And sometimes, it's an individual for a smaller business. Larger ones, further up the scale, will go up to the lower middle market, not much above that. Um, we don't have much access to deal flow above that, frankly. So up to your lower middle market kind of focus area, you'll get situations where you have several executives, you have a board, and mostly you're thinking of dealing with family members being pretty common, or partners that might have had a dispute or a falling out. So there are all kinds of factors that might lead people to sell their business or to want to operate it to a point and sell it shortly after that. So that's a big part of it, and the financing that goes along with that, arranging debt and equity, um, and finally, sometimes it's really just at the portfolio company level, dealing with the clients, dealing with the challenges internally, operationally, as well as the end user, so to speak, of security and investigations type of service and products.
Okay, great. And do you still do like hands-on stuff with the risk management side of things, like specifically, out maybe if it's not even related to the M&A side of things?
Yeah, less and less so. Um, on rare occasions. So we have some companies in our group that we own like part of them, right? Or we're in the process of taking them through an exit or a growth strategy, whatever the case may be. Um, and when you have more complex cases that take cooperation between several different firms, that's definitely a point at which I can get involved and make sure everybody's kind of going the same direction and aware of what everyone else is doing. So that's kind of more directing things, not so much practical. Um,
And,
and
and
then the
what's the
practical
biggest
stuff.
risk that would lie in a situation like that?
Do you say risk or place?
Risk.
Risk. Hmm. Well, the companies that we are involved with do things like executive protection and dealing with all kinds of death threats, as well as substantial financial loss because they can be executives of Fortune 100 companies or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I think the biggest risk would be just the death and the financial loss that results from the death of an executive or somebody else under protection like that. Alternatively, just a mass casualty type of event, um, active shooters in the U.S. or elsewhere. It's more often bombings. Not that we don't have them, but yeah, I mean, that'd be the worst examples I could think of. The rest are financial, and it has to do with typically cybersecurity incidents related to like ransomware or major downtime at the wrong time. Um, those things are going to have the greatest financial impact. We don't deal a lot with politicians. If we dealt more with politicians or government contracting, politicians, their reputation is the main thing they're concerned about. Um,
Above personal safety?
Well, hell, I mean, I think some of them wouldn't mind getting shot just for the street cred, like 50 Cent or Ronald Reagan or something. Right? So anyway, it really is just I couldn't speak to their motivations so much because that's not my background and that's not the clientele we have in the portfolio. Mostly, it's corporate and high profile individuals in the private sector. And then we do have companies we're working with more, which are serving more of the kind of law enforcement agencies and government agencies that have contracts. Not an expert in that stuff personally, but we're doing more deals in that world. And for those, I mean, the consequences for whatever they're doing going wrong is obviously very substantial for totally different reasons. But yeah, in the context we're typically dealing in, it's loss of life on a relatively small scale would be the worst thing.
Um, I remember that most of your deals has been working on the sell side, right?
Yeah,
With people.
that's right.
If someone's listening now that they're in the you could potentially help them in the world of selling their business or acquiring business. Let's stick with sell for now. What should they be thinking about as they kind of approach that goalpost?
First thing would be taxes, I guess, um, which isn't a very exciting thing to say, and I'm sorry to disappoint you all, but you need a good year, or at least a year, where you've tried to show as much of a profit as possible without it being clear that you're not deriving any earnings from it. So depending on the size of your business and the nature of the business model, your financials that you report to the government must be absolutely what you're expecting people to take as the basis for evaluation. And you'll see that come up a lot. You know, if they'll lie to the government, they'll lie to you. Yes, possibly true. The problem is you can't prove it one way or the other. And so it gives the other side, even if they're willing to accept that, two things. Now they're either going to think, oh, hey, look, this person's committing fraud and we can't trust them, but we're willing to accept it and just negotiate really hard. And then that's kind of bad for you. On the other hand, if it's not fraudulent and you're reporting everything exactly as you should and everything is 100% ducks in a row, no problem, but it just doesn't show much profit because you intentionally used it to offset your tax obligation and enjoy your life. That's common with small businesses and it's not great for the sale. So that's the main thing. It's just like your financials really need to be something you think about as the basis for your valuation. And one of the best ways to certify that being accurate is to match what you tell the government. The other thing is the second key thing is that your business needs to be more than just your insight, your expertise, your network. If it's too dependent on you or your reputation, you're going to have a hard time selling it in a scenario that's not an acqui-hire, which is fine on its own if you want to be acqui-hired, right? But that's what you'd be looking at more often in that case. Or it's a longer process to go through, and then you're going to need to create a system. Basically, it's almost like building a new business because you're changing the nature of your business so much, unless you really can just slap a brand on it and say, hey, look, we're moving to a branded thing and it's not about me anymore, which can be done with online business models, influencer type things over the course of about a year.
So on both ends, it takes at least a year or so to kind of right the ship.
Yeah, if you're not ready now. Otherwise, you're looking at just let's say you have a business a little more substantial. You have executives, you have solid accounting, you have everything that you would want to have, a management team in place. Those sort of deals that you'll see in the 10 to 20 and $50 million range where it's a proper organization, but not very big, not very big. And in that scenario, yeah, you might already have everything pretty much ready to go for a sale. But this is a very, very small percentage of businesses that are thinking they might like to sell. In that case, yeah, you should stop. You should talk to somebody and get the process started and make sure that if you're in a situation like the hypothetical that you're mentioning, this is the person who can make the entire decision to sell their business themselves. This is not like a committee thing. Then yeah, like first and foremost, make sure that the thing is transferable and evidently so, and that your numbers all reflect a profitable operation, positive cash flow operation that can be transferred. That's the product people are buying. If that's not what they're buying, then they're just buying you. They're buying your time, which is okay, but that's what you're doing.
Cool. Any particular stories that stick out to you, what you can share, details you can share, from deal making or the risk management world, that are some of your favorites?
Yeah, sure. Choose one though. I'll start there. Otherwise, I can talk way too long. Yeah. Which kind of stories?
Okay, risk management.
Okay. I will. Let's see. I'd say that one of the first ones that made me think about the value of building a group that was, the reason it's called distributed risk basically has to do with the fact that rather than creating a centralized conglomerate type of model where we try to go compete with some firms that are, very excellent and we respect a lot and we get work from in our different companies, subcontract type of thing. That's one way to do it. The other way is what we've chosen, which is to facilitate the growth of these companies and move them through a process, but allow them to maintain their independence, their brand, their operations, staffing, everything, kind of the way that they do. So taking them through a process to exit or merge or something is fine, but we don't force anything. And that shift to this sort of business model started in 2020. We set up distributed risk because of a case where a woman in the Philippines had a child with a man who she was not married to. Um, he passed away. His mother, the paternal grandmother of the child, allegedly constructed a sort of scenario where the client was really set up to look like a bad mother. And this involved a police raid where drugs were, they said planted. I don't know for sure, but that's what they say. And the refrigerator prior to it had been emptied. And so the maid that was also helping take care of the child emptied the refrigerator and just put a bunch of liquor and vodka bottles in there, nothing else. And then of course came the raid. And so the client's sitting in jail. The paternal grandmother gets the custody of the child, temporary, and is supposed to return once the woman's out of jail. So the woman got out of jail in pretty short order because the whole scenario didn't really hold up. And the guy who was, I guess, the detective leading the whole kind of raid, the bust, I suppose, he ended up getting caught and really screwed over because he was doing corrupt stuff like planting drugs during raid. So in the Philippines, if you don't know this, you might, but the listeners might not know that back during that time, around 2019 or so, I believe it was still the Duterte administration, and in 2020, in that range, they were really aggressively anti-drug. And she had already been going through this since prior to when she brought it to us, obviously. And this was people being killed in mass numbers by the thousands for drug possession related things. So it's not like a light thing. And she needed help because they all were financially well off people. Like this was not really like a Jerry Springer type of thing. It was fairly involved, a lot of attorneys, and a lot of it had to do with money, sadly. And the custody of the child essentially conferred rights to some funds, right? So it's a financial battle as much as it is a battle for reunification of the mother with her child. The problem was that she wasn't in the Philippines, and it wasn't certain if she was in Italy or in the United States in a particular state. And so we needed to coordinate with attorneys, private investigators, intelligence collectors, and law enforcement across those three different jurisdictions. Meanwhile, I was in a fourth country doing this.
You were where?
And I was in Mexico while I was handling this. And so all of that was going on. We had contractors in Italy, investigators in the US, Australia, people just in different parts of the world working on this thing. And, it took a long time. And the more important point is that because it was all over the place, there was no definite answer to whether something could be done here but not there, or how exactly the process would have to go. It wasn't a straightforward kind of kidnap and ransom thing. It was technically a kidnapping, but you needed to prove it. You needed to substantiate it. I mean, we needed to get photographic evidence essentially of the child with the paternal grandmother, and it's just this whole thing. What applies to it, and dealing with attorneys in each of those places. And as I was living in Southeast Asia, I guess at the time, in Eastern Europe, I was doing different kinds of contract work for security investigation stuff. And there would be firms in Australia, for instance, which had things covering Indonesia, Philippines, Australia, and other nearby countries. The cases happening all over them. And in some places, it'll be legal to gather certain type of information a certain way. In other places, it's not legal to do that. And you could be looking at a lot of problems, right? So in the context of the United States, for example, they had the same thing in Australia, sort of state by state. In one place, it is legal. Let's say if I have a Zoom call with you and I record the Zoom call and I don't tell you, obviously it will tell you in Zoom. So that's a bad example, but like a normal phone call, right? Whatever. And if you don't know and you don't consent to it, and I record it, some places that's fine and it's admissible as evidence and there's no crime to it and it's whatever. In other places, it's a felony. You can go to prison. You know? It's a big deal. And the difference between where you can do it and also where you're calling from, like that can be an issue as well. It's just this whole mess. Ultimately, the child was located, but the process of reuniting them, that was out of our hands and it took a bit longer from what I understand. Though the thing that really hit me though is just how much need there is for it. And if you work in this kind of industry, in this environment, you see a lot of the large global firms, ultimately they're just subcontracting the local providers. And that's fine. It's a functional model that's been going just fine for as long as it's been around. But there is a degree of accountability lost, efficiency lost, not to mention layers of cost added for the client who actually needs the service. And I'm not here selling like cost savings, you know, but nonetheless, that you can still be giving the guys who are doing the work top rates and clients paying less. That you can have both, and that's quite nice. And the other element of it, of course, is just being able to be effective across those different jurisdictions in a meaningful, efficiently conducted time frame versus it being delayed and in a bureaucratic manner, not knowing what's going on, not knowing who's handling your case or your account right now, getting an out of office message, you know, email reply when you're trying to figure out what is the status of locating my daughter. You know?
The
Out of
stakes would be
office.
a lot higher.
Right, yeah. So it's a different level of treatment that we can facilitate. And again, not to slight those companies, they don't treat people that badly, and it's a great industry to be in because people do care. But nonetheless, we saw an opportunity to run a business that essentially functions a little bit like the finance and marketing, sales, business development elements of a conglomerate sort of corporate HQ, but more in a distributed manner, where essentially we're using third parties in many cases who are experts in different things and making sure they're all coordinated to get the best outcome for the companies so that they can provide the best security and intelligence services to their clients.
That's interesting. The thing that comes to my mind is, are you familiar at all with Jocko Willink and his teachings?
I am familiar with the man. I haven't read, I guess I read about 3/4 of the way through one of his books on a flight, but I couldn't like quote or tell you a whole lot about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The concept that comes to my mind is like the robustness of a network when it's distributed leadership versus like a top-down approach. So it's interesting to have you tell me that seems to be the most effective way for you in this context as well.
It is. And that also has to do with who I am. And I've had a pretty non-traditional background, as I've described it here for you. It was driven a lot by, well, if I wasn't going to have a supplement company like Tim Ferriss, what was I going to do? And I was already in the security and investigation business. So, yeah, I mean, that approach was, okay, well, there are people running these companies that do absolutely incredible stuff from either a technology perspective or their resume, CV, track record, doing amazing things, which are on a wide range from Nobel Prize worthy to heroic. And then there's just me, sunburned, you know, drinking my beer on the beach, thinking like, well, what do I do? What do I do to fit in here? How do I make myself useful? So that was it, really. You know, let them be
I
all
have a feeling you're
maniacs.
not giving yourself enough credit, even though that's funny.
No, man, that's the problem too. Is like you think I'm trying to be like disarming and like, oh, haha, for me, but really it was like, okay, you got to make yourself useful because a lot of these guys are, in many cases, the people that I would look up to. Oh man, in another life, I would love to be that guy. That guy's John Wick, you know. And here's me. So what I bring to the table though for them, and what I've assembled, really, the table that I've gathered together, is that a lot of these people who are experts in their craft, maybe they're just very good with cybersecurity, very amazing running a small team of people for security type operations in some random countries, or they do a physical security product, whatever. That's their thing that they really excel at, that I find so cool, and I find so necessary and valuable. But they don't necessarily have a great grasp of other things they could be doing that would make them much wealthier or allow them to have a greater impact if that's what drives them. Um, we deal with companies that are involved with helping people survive mass shootings at schools. Like, yeah, they want to make money, but it's not. There's a lot of things they can do with their time. You know?
Well,
So
probably not why
in
they got
that,
in.
right, exactly. It's a little bit of a downer to like wake up to that every day. Like, this is what we're working on, unless you're into it and passionate about that. So that's where I saw, okay, I went and I learned how to find information and try to make myself useful in that field, which is great. But then I knew I needed a different business model. I needed to understand money and finance and deal structuring and all that better to have more leverage and to be able to offer that. So, like we talked about earlier, to be helpful instead of helpless, and to be able to help yourself and help other people who are helping people, and get compensated in a way that you can enjoy while you're young, was something that I've worked hard at, and I've started to enjoy the benefits of it. And yeah, I think overall, quite pleased with how it's turned out. So yeah, I'm not beating myself up too much. I'm grateful.
What does that look like from a deal structure perspective? Are you taking like less than a majority of the equity, or how does that all work to make
Me
sure that all those
personally,
are aligned?
yeah. So it's structured through like SPVs, which we have a corporate entity which takes varying degrees of ownership in those SPVs. The compensation structure of these deals can vary over a period of time. And so there may be monthly fees, there may be only a success fee at the conclusion of a transaction and no equity. There are other cases where there's equity at the beginning, and that can be expanded over time. If we failed, it could go back. The deal can be unwound. I've had a couple that I walked away from after everything, just gave the equity back because I wasn't going to be able to deliver what I'd hoped. I've had some that went amazingly well. I've had some that I paid cash and lost money. That I felt very dumb about. So, we've done some good stuff, but yeah, the deal structure is very substantial. We took a minority stake, which technically triggers upon any change in control or ownership or whatever. It's just kind of like fanning floating type of thing. Uh, for primarily for licensing and regulatory reasons, it needs to maintain its ownership thing without changing a whole lot. Um, but again, the structures change, and so when we complete a merger with that one, obviously that'll be reflected differently. And we've had others where we take a stake, we use that one to acquire 100% of another one. And, in other situations, it's the cash and credit of the buy side. And they're the ones that end up, and we might take a fee for sure, like to get paid. But also we can take ownership in the SPV, owns the deal, or the surviving entity. So either way is okay. But yeah, if what you're asking, I gave a far more long and involved answer than I needed to. It varies, but we're not as much in the business of doing like full on buyouts or raising a fund and going and doing like just buying up businesses in a roll up in that fashion. Haven't done that. I've done buy side work for people who did, but it wasn't. Ultimately, it wasn't my fund.
Cool. Got a story in mind for the acquisition side of things? Favorite one?
Oh, yeah, cash transaction, not literal cash, although that would have made it even more awesome. But
Rolling up with a briefcase and sunglasses.
Yeah, I don't know. A briefcase might not have been big enough. I've never seen I've never seen 200,000 in cash, like in person.
Yeah.
Um, like it's probably not that much, right? It's just 200. Well, no, it's 2,000.
How much are those stacks? Those stacks are usually like 10 grand, right? The ones that are
I
like
guess
about
so.
yay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that's 10 grand, you do the math. It's not that much. So anyway, I guess maybe a little lunchbox. It was a pretty small deal, but it was more about how it happened that I thought was great. So you had one of these online businesses that made its money from affiliate and advertising revenue. And from what I could tell, its content was just before the whole chat GPT wave, you had a variety of content rewriting, article spinning sort of services out there, automated ones that were pretty awful, and then content rewriters, which you could hire from Upwork or whatever. And I guess that's what they did. They had Amazon reviews. They'd go through and they'd find a bunch of the top performing products on Amazon in a category. And then they would just look at all the reviews and pretty much rewrite that into an article. And then Amazon Associates, which is their affiliate program at the time, may still be. And it was making between ten and $20,000 a month net, which was I think 95% margin. So it just barely any expenses. It was vanishingly small, making a pretty substantial amount of cash flow. So you might think, okay, well, $200,000 deal though that's not very big. And that's true. That's part of what the funny part about it is that I'll tell you. But the return was pretty crazy for what they got. They ultimately ended up selling it for about 500K, I believe, after owning it for a year and a half and pulling between 10 and 20,000 net per month for that entire time. And it was I negotiated it down from 300,000 to 200,000 because we found some. So if you don't really know much about this, then you can look up what a private blog network is. But essentially, it's a tool to boost the rankings of a site in the search engine results page. That's a little bit frowned upon. If you control all the different sites linking to each other, back then at the time, I don't even know if this stuff still works, but you could kind of artificially boost the ranking of your site and get it more traffic. And he was using those. So PBN links they're a bit of a yellow flag. And if you don't know anything about SEO and you're going to try to acquire one of these, then it'd be a pretty bad move. Okay. You got to buy the whole thing with it. And you got to know why that is important and how that works. This was at the time, again, it's 2018 or 19. We negotiated down from there. But the thing was, this guy was in Vietnam and he was Vietnamese and did not want to speak English over the phone. He'll type it with me, but he just didn't feel comfortable negotiating, which I totally understand. If I spoke Vietnamese, which would be very difficult, if you've ever been there, it's pretty. That is a difficult one to pin down if you're an American English speaker natively. So I would feel very uncomfortable negotiating in Vietnamese, right? And I said, okay, fine. We'll just talk through Skype. That's what he wanted to do, was message through Skype. And so we ended up doing a negotiation down from 300,000 to 200,000 based on the due diligence process after sort of LOI stage. And that negotiation in text, where it's not somebody's first language. I mean, I'm feeling myself getting angry at this guy, and I'm sure he hated me, but ultimately we still made the deal because it was a cash deal. And we used, an escrow account and transferred him $200,000. Like, yeah, as soon as everything was settled. And that I just always found it amusing. My $200,000 Skype chat, just angry. Like I could see the impatience. Like so and so is typing, and I'm just sitting there in bed, just pissed off. First thing in the morning, I wake up to is this guy just being like a hard negotiator, and he was really haggling with me. And I mean, I'm the haggler in this case. I'm trying to pay less, but it was irritating, man. I was pissed, and the guy I was working with at the time, it was basically a syndicated deal, raise capital and then go find these. It's sort of a blind pool syndication. And he'd go find these businesses around this size, low to mid six figures, and do a bunch of them, but needed approval for every deal, you know. And the process of it is just like I'm getting upset. And he full on recommended, have you considered meditation? Maybe this is a you problem, you know? So I
East
did. I
East
started
versus
meditating.
West, a negotiation, right?
Yeah, well, this guy was actually Russian, Israeli, Russian guy. Super nice, super smart guy. Great to work with. Great to learn from. Buy side. I went to work with him to learn
Got
buy
it.
side.
Got it. Got it.
And
Okay. I thought you were talking about the buyer, the seller of the blog.
oh no, he didn't suggest meditation. This was the guy who I was doing the deal for
Got
essentially,
it.
and he was right. I started meditating. It was really helpful. But you wouldn't think, like between the tools you need, what do you need to be a deal maker? You need Skype, escrow.com, SEM Rush, and meditation. Yeah, it was cool though.
The ultimate tool set.
That's right, man. That's the arsenal right there for at least quick six-figure deals.
Cool. That might transition nicely into let's end on this. Appreciate you sharing everything so far. What about not for people necessarily selling a business, but deal making advice in general? What would you say, or some things you would advise somebody on, kind of like what you were saying in the beginning, making sure the terms are good, make sure the timing is good, all that kind of stuff.
Mm, yeah. There was a point in the beginning of my whole process, but not the very beginning. I mean, I got surprisingly far where I still didn't feel like I really understood the concept of leverage. Right? You know what it means, you see it,
Leverage.
you read the word. Yeah. Yeah. And then like you can mean it in the J. Abraham sense where everything is leveraged if you look at it the right way. You can mean it in the financial sense. We're talking about debt, um, in its application. I think really understanding that was important for me. And there were times when I sat down at Google and I was like, what is leverage? Like, I really was looking for the deep answer to it because, the first time you encounter that concept was in like an introduction to physics class or whatever in middle school. Okay. I
You have the
understand.
fulcrum and maybe the seesaw or something like that, right?
Right. Right. Exactly. But I felt that this was still, the example was too concrete for something that felt was being used too abstractly. And I couldn't really connect that. People keep saying you need to do high leverage activities. You need to high leverage kind of approach to things and leverage your relationships, leverage your resources. Yeah, okay, cool. But what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? How do you actually structure that in financial terms, in networking terms, in deal structure terms? And if I were to sit here and go on about that for hours, we would still be having, differences of opinion, differences of interpretation, how to structure something. There's no one right way to do it. But just kind of thinking on that concept helped me a lot, helped me send me down rabbit holes that educated me to be more effective at things. And then the other more effective at deal structure, that's what I'd say, and negotiation. And the other part of that is just looking from the other side's perspective, which I guess you could call empathy, but it's also just marketing in a way. So a mistake I have made often and would try to warn people not to make is just being selfish or self-centered or self-directed in your view of how you're trying to get a deal done. And so convincing someone to do something or, whatever. It's not a movie, if you unless you really have some serious weight, some serious leverage, right? Unless you really do, you can't just go in and be a dick to people. When you're talking about lower middle market companies, you're dealing with individuals, their children, so such and such and sons, or even the security and investigations business. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of husband and wife teams. There's a lot of father and son, a lot of brothers and small groups. That even if they're just business partners, they might have gone to college together. These are not faceless conglomerates. You're still dealing with very personal kind of negotiation. Um, so looking at it from like, what are they really trying to achieve has been helpful. Like what is really underneath what they're saying that they might not be aware of. Doing the same for yourself, but just if you can get them what they really want out of it, that's helpful. It's probably more important than reading another book about negotiating, right? Which is, I just got so focused on tactics for so long. It just, I love pitch anything as a, never split the difference, flip the script, all that kind of material is great. It's very useful, but it doesn't really help that much if you don't think about what the other side is trying to get, or what, if you're trying to acquire a business, for instance, what are they really, really motivated by, or any kind of deal you're trying to complete. Understanding those motivations and being able to look at leverage from that perspective as well. I think that's the most important thing you can do. If you're looking to sell your business, for instance, it applies to you as well. Think about your buyers, think about people who might buy part of your company, all of your company, just your IP, whatever. Their motivations will differ. Somebody who's trying to leave corporate life and essentially buy themselves a job where they feel like they're their own boss, just because your favorite, entrepreneur influencer tells you that that's not cool, and that's not the way to get rich anymore. Doesn't matter. Somebody who's worked 40 years in the accounting department for a regional firm, the idea for them that they won't have to deal with all those people they don't like seeing and go into that call center sort of office environment, that's awesome for them. They're going to be happy to go get an SBA loan and take the personal guarantee risk and do all that and be responsible for being the owner operator. And they're excited about it. And it's not our job to take that away from them or tell them, oh, you're just buying yourself a job. Like, okay, let them do it. And alternatively, if they're a private equity group and they're not on their first fund and they're asking you questions about your financials that you're not really sure how to answer, but you are doing, enough net essentially to catch the attention of private equity long enough for them to ask you those questions, then you probably do need some help, because you need to think from their perspective. What are their motivations? What are their motivations as a group? And whose motivations are they concerned about? You're going to want to structure your deal to take that into account. Let's say one of them is going to ask you for an earnout, but they're going to pay you more as a final number. The other one's going to go have to borrow money, and an underwriter from an SBA preferred lender underwriting department is basically going to make a decision on how much your business is worth and then loan them a percentage of that value, right? That's going to have a lot more to do with the value of your business than any other factor, as long as everything else makes it qualified. So that guy coming out, buying himself a job, even though you might see people say that in your little favorite Facebook group, oh, don't buy yourself a job, that's what he wants. And he's going to give you, a couple million, 4 million cash today instead of 6 million, but you have to keep working for 2 years because he wants to come take your job. Let him do it. Let him do it. Help him. That's what I'd say. Just think about the motivations of the people you're dealing with. Deeply think about it, more than just like, oh yeah, I thought about leverage, I thought about that. No, really, 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 that's the meat of what we do. And every time I forget that, I fail and waste time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what the aha moments were for leverage as well as for the empathy side of things, but it sounds like they're kind of mixed together. It's almost like that empathy thing taught you about the leverage and vice versa.
Yeah. Also debt. I mean, just being in debt, getting out of debt, personally, and also using it within the context of business, seeing people that have done it really well, that helped me too. Sometimes theory is good. When I was growing up and going through school, I could handle theory. I could handle sitting there and listening and taking a test. But you don't really know something well enough to do it to the point where you get bored because you're just too good. You don't really know it until you just do it a lot of times. Everybody accepts this, but you have to fully embrace that. You have to do it a lot of times to get proficient to a level where you're comfortable and comfortable to the point where you need to push yourself to do something more difficult. So for me, that still hasn't come. Like, I've got a lot of improving to do, but elements of it I have gotten good at. And I'd say the leverage piece really didn't make complete sense to me until I had more hands-on examples of it being used in a profitable way. Um, all of the theoretical stuff, all the like Jay Abraham material that I've consumed over the years, I appreciate that concept, that approach to leverage and joint ventures and partnerships. I appreciate it a lot. It has been helpful for me, but it was still quite abstract in comparison to seeing the effect that a change in an interest rate can have on returns over a period of time. If you structure the deal differently, what would the effect be over a period of time? Change that period of time, what would the change be? So like seeing here's an equation essentially for an outcome and modifying each one of these variables. And then if you're able to modify those variables depending on other things, which you can affect, then you're seeing like massive changes in the final number. That's where it finally sank for me. And that was sitting and having long conversations with people about deals they've done where they took the time to explain to me, this is how I went from 1 to 20 properties over this period of time using these credit products. It's wow, now it makes sense because they took the time and went through it with me. And I've done some things with that kind of structure with different partners and different deals. So until I really did it, I didn't learn it that well. The empathy thing, I mean, that I was fortunate to have had that, from my child growing up, and I wasn't one of those people that had to learn too much the hard way about sales and marketing and all that, looking from the other person's perspective, but remembering to apply it all the way through and not take for granted, your sort of first judgment of what their motives are. That's the hard part. That's the part that takes practice. What you think someone's motive is, after they tell you what it is, you might think, oh, they told me this, but it's probably this, and you think you're clever. But if you don't really invest some time and energy into understanding somebody, you could be as wrong as any other guess. So I'd say they're somewhat related, but really the leverage one was more based in numbers and just needing to understand that.
That's really insightful. That last thing you said, I'm just curious about, which is, maybe someone tells you what they want, and maybe you can take it at face value, or you can infer something else from it. How do you personally kind of make sure you're increasing your probability that what they want? Does it come down to listening? Comes down to intuition? Is it a mix of both?
It's definitely both. I think intuition is helpful. Some people have a natural ability for things that others don't, right? And so I probably have a degree of intuitive inclination toward understanding people's motivations. At the same time, if I was a true like prodigy at it, I'd be so much more wealthy than I am. So I think there's a measure of humility that we all have to look at. But I would say part of it is intuition. The other part is just the active listening process that you can be formulaic about. You can learn it. So if you've always felt like you can't really tell when people are interested in something, you can't really tell when people are lying, whatever it is. Some people are really gullible. Some people are really naive. Some people just don't give a shit and they're off in their own world. And alternatively, it's just kind of average, right? People tend to be around the average for anything. That's what makes it the average. So if you wanted to become excellent at it, you would have to continue to practice, yes, but in such a way where you're organized and you're able to sort of measure it. And you can get that through, I guess, games that involve a degree of it, but also just going out and doing things that maybe have a lower consequence for you than large deals that can affect your life, but they still do require an element of negotiation and listening. And I think that listening is a process that we can all practice in an organized fashion. You can buy books, courses, whatever you need on being a better active listener. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day, reminding myself, because when you pay attention like that, you catch things. And when I say doing it in an organized way, I mean write it down. You can't really be organized if you're not tracking things, if you're not writing things down. And if you note over a period of time, whether you're one of these people who can get it all done in some miraculous 30-minute one call close, and they told you all of their deep pain and everything, and you were just like able to present them a future and walk them along to it. And, okay, great, you've had training, you're awesome. But if you're not one of those people, or you're not a natural and you haven't had any formal training in sales, or you were never a missionary or whatever it was that brought you to have this ability, then you're going to just have to go through the process of sucking at it for a while until you don't, unfortunately. But the organized way of achieving that is writing down what you observe and making sure that you're listening more than you're talking, which in this interview format I'm horribly failing at. But generally, yeah, you're going to hear opportunities and you're going to hear doubts and all kinds of things for people if you invest the time and remain patient to really genuinely listen without putting your gut reaction. This is where the instinct can betray you. Assessment over what they've said. Like you said, when they tell you something face value, and then you kind of like, oh, actually, probably this. And I'm saying, don't trust that first thing you think it is, but note it. Make note of it, because it might be that you're right, but you also want to challenge that assumption, because people can also deceive you, and I have been deceived, which is humiliating for somebody in my line of work to get like fleeced for money. It's it's so frustrating. We're supposed to be experts at preventing this, and this individual played on my empathy quite masterfully. And I remember looking at this. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was probably about 10% of what I made that year. So it was annoying. it was enough to frustrate me into a drink. I sort of said, look, how did this guy do this? How did he pull this shit off? I mean, bit by bit, piece by piece, he took it. It wasn't all at once. It wasn't, one kind of scam where I sent somebody my crypto. It was a little more over time, playing on my belief that we're friends, my desire to be helpful. When I see somebody suffering and they haven't even asked for money and you're offering it, and then I realized this person had constructed all of that. Like, I'm fully conned in the emotional sense of it, as well as the greed. They worked in some greed, they worked in some suffering, some like pity over the course of 2 months or so. And then by the end of it, I just got ripped off. Like, I thought that guy was my friend. Never. But in fact, if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have. I probably wouldn't be married right now, because for being a crook, one of his main things he insisted on, as like a very kind of traditional guy, was like, you need to, you're in your 30s now. You need to get married and choose one woman and be dedicated to her and love her, and stop doing the stuff that you're doing. And you're right, man. And so I asked her to be my girlfriend, like officially, and we got married a year after that. So we always joke, like, this guy, it was good advice. It was worth the money.
Yeah. Is
But the
a
point is,
life coach from him, right?
yeah, right, exactly. And probably cost me less than some of these guys out there with their ads. But nonetheless, I use that as an example of saying it's very important. This was later, this wasn't that long ago, and it's a few years now, but it feels recent. And it was later in my whole progress of learning to do deals or whatever. And why was that significant? Why was it so humiliating? Not just as a risk management professional, but as a deal maker, because there was a greed element to it. As I mentioned, there was some of that woven in. I was going to complete an acquisition, and then, the dude's mom died or something. Just all of this finagle my cash out of me. And it's because I thought I had that under control. I thought, here's what he's telling me. Here's what's really going on. I'm on top of this. And I was so wrong, man. I'm never going to see that money again. And every time he was supposed to get it back to me, like, somehow ended up being this whole works around thing that cost me more money. Which you would only do something so stupid if you really believe somebody was your friend and you had a proper read of their intentions and their motivations. And I did not, and I do this for a living. So, is that my favorite story? And certainly, I didn't mention it when you asked me stories. I'm bringing it up now because I think people ought to hear it. It can happen to you. It can happen to anybody. And so don't get so high on your early successes. And at the same time, don't be afraid to get started. Like I said, it was maybe 10% of what I made that year. It was annoying, but it was also kind of nice because I was able to look back and say, well, look, that was a really good year then. Because there were times when that was about what I made in the whole year. So it was like, okay, I can lose that much. I can move on. I don't have to hunt this guy down if I wanted to. But that's the main thing I would say. Just empathy, yes, but don't be taken advantage of, and don't all look for the worst in people either. You need to challenge your gut reaction and your instinct, but listen. Listen to your instincts. Just be careful. Trust but verify, they say, and like really verify, double verify.
Yeah. Yeah. And your approach of looking at it with curiosity seems like it benefited you in the long run. Like how did
Yeah,
it happen, and reflecting on it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I had to look at my own why I was susceptible to that, right? Like why would a person identify me as a person to invest their time into deceiving on the basis of friendship and emotional levers and all that and greed, and that is a harsh reflection. If you look at why you were the victim of a con artist, even for a relatively small amount of money, or if you fall for some stupid little internet scam or whatever it is, whether it's $5 or 5 million or whatever it is, like you got to look at why did that work on me, and how did they know it would? Or why were they confident enough it would work to choose me instead of somebody else, right? Um, and just frankly, it's like, okay, well, that was helpful. It was helpful to look at
Yeah.
that.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
because it's almost like that is your strength, and maybe your weakness in that situation was the helpfulness.
Yeah, damn, good point, man. It's somebody could see something that would normally I would consider it a strength or a positive attribute. And so I had my guard down in that one area, thinking there's nothing wrong with this. Why would I not? And it actually what you said there totally lines up with what I ultimately learned from it from a different perspective. And that was the more I continue to succeed in business financially, the more I would be tempted to screw things up that way and give it away ostensibly or find ways to part myself with it because of a bit of I would be a bad person if I didn't help him right now. I would be a bad person if you know I didn't do this deal because I'm being a wuss, or like I'd be a bad person if I hadn't amounted to much by this point, so I'm not able to help. I'm helpless and I'm immoral and I'm lacking empathy. And so I'm being helpful and I'm being empathetic and I'm trying to be the good guy. Why? Because of how I saw myself as like someone who isn't and has to prove it. Or like, what is it? That took me a bit of looking at it. It's like, what the hell was that about? It's got taxed for a weak self-image.
Is that where the meditation came in as well? You sit.
That was later, man. That's because I stopped meditating. That's why you got me.
There you
I would have I would have seen it coming. But
go.
hey, look, it's also a nod to his skill. I'd say to my own credit, he had a reasonable degree of skill. I think my wife, who is Turkish, saw it coming. This guy is Turkish, and so it was sort of funny. Turkey's got a reputation for this sort of shit. And, I should have seen it coming a mile away, but yeah, it's whatever. It's just the guy I'm helping out. I'm hanging out with him. He's a nice guy. It's no big deal. It's just a little bit here. It's a little bit there. Oh, his mom died. Oh, he's going to give me half of this business over here. We're doing deals. And then 2 months into it, he does owe me kind of a lot of money, doesn't he? and that's not coming back. He got me good. He got me good. But if I saw him now, I would just laugh. I mean, what are you gonna do? And
Yeah.
the irony is, I hope he spent it fast because the lira tanked by like another 50% in the time that transpired.
Wow. Yeah. We were just in Turkey, and yeah, something similar happened with the lira, and something
Yeah.
similar happened to me with the taxi drivers there. So we
Oh,
share that in common.
yeah.
That
Call them
sounds like
the
to a
yellow
lower scale,
terrorists.
but yeah.
Oh man, I mean, maybe a little bit. Depends on how bad they got you. They're awful, then, man. If your listeners have not been to Istanbul, I'll tell you, like, get the apps and get the B taxi or the even Uber. It'll still be taxis, but just you got to at least know where you're going.
Man.
Did you enjoy it?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I like Turkey a lot. We stayed mostly in Antalya.
Beautiful.
Yeah, amazing. Um, yeah, I found it to be the most underrated digital nomad destination. Like no one really talks about it, but
Mm,
to me, being in Antalya was kind of like being in a Italian coastal town without the prices, and without the crowds.
yeah, yeah, man, I love it there. I was in Kash for a little bit, which is near
There.
Antalya. Kash,
Okay.
yeah, so it's near Antalya, kind of up the road a little bit, and it's just one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And I'm not a naturally athletically gifted person. So I was trying scuba diving for the first time. I didn't learn to swim until I was like 13. I was just like, all right, scuba diving, let's do this. It was incredible.
Yeah.
But it was a little bit trippy because you're not really swimming. That's the thing that threw me off. You really don't swim much. You're more kind of going about it in a different way. And I had somebody with me who was like an instructor, but I was definitely having a hard time at first because the mask, if you're listening and you can't see, I have a beard and the mask wouldn't get a proper seal. And so water kept coming in and like I was starting to freak out a little bit. It was funny. I had a great time, but definitely one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Colton, I really enjoyed our conversation. What's the best way to get in touch with you online, and who should be reaching out to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. And as far as who should reach me, I mean, I think if you need help with buying or selling a business or financing within security risk management field, that's very broad. It could be crisis management, PR, it could be physical products, but as long as it's within that field, then I'm definitely interested in helping you. At the same time, if you're just interested in any of the things that we talked about today and you want to have a quick chat, then certainly open to it.
Awesome. And last name is two F's and two T's, right? Moffitt.
That's right. That's correct.
Cool. Well, thanks again for sitting down today, and looking forward to chatting again.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you having me and safe travels, man. Talk soon.
Thank you. That's soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.